Okay, this is slide 8, our last slide in our 1920s units. And yes, more frowny face, more problems. The roaring 20s here would not end well. All right, when we last left our presidential story, I said we had 3 consecutive Republican presidents in the 20s. Warren G. Harding dies. Vice President Calvin Coolidge becomes president. Coolidge will get elected in his own right in 24. Hated being president, couldn't wait to get out. So that gets us to 1928. We have 2 main candidates here. The Republicans are going to nominate Coolidge's Secretary of Commerce, Herbert Hoover. If the economy's booming, everything's going well, you credit your Secretary of Commerce, the man in charge of business. So he's going to get nominated by the Republicans. Hoover was a very shy, sort of standoffish guy, dignified Quaker. He was not a good politician. He's a very good administrator, good at running an efficient office, assembling facts, managing other people, but not a great sort of, leader among men here. He will run against the Democrats' nominee, New York Governor Al Smith. Smith was a joking, glad-handing liberal. He was pro-alcohol, so he wanted to end prohibition, pro-alcohol, and Roman Catholic. We had never had a Roman Catholic president up to that point, and we're still not going to get one now. The great concern was always that a Catholic president was going to make decisions based on Rome, what the Catholic Church said, rather than what was best for the country. So, a Catholic had not been elected president up to that point. And, little spoiler here, Smith's not going to be it. Okay, but there you see the political cartoon on the left of Herbert Hoover, and there's Al Smith right there. Okay. Now, radio, as we said earlier in this unit, is going to play a big part in this campaign. Okay? Hoover is a businessman, a very distinguished, well-educated businessman. He's Midwestern, so he has virtually no accent. He's accepted by the whole country, right, when they hear him on the radio. Smith has a very thick, harsh New York accent. Okay, he will turn off a lot of people when they hear him on the radio. Southerners couldn't half understand what he was saying on the radio. And even though the candidates had hoped for a respectable campaign, this very quickly turned ugly. The mudslinging began. It got very dirty on both sides. The Republicans accused of Al Smith of rum, Romanism, and ruin. Rum meaning the pro-alcohol thing, Romanism meaning the Catholic thing, and ruin. If you elect Al Smith, we'll get nothing but rum, Romanism, and ruin. And that was the high point of the campaign. It kind of went downhill from there. Okay? Hoover will win mainly on the support of the South. Now, if you think back, since Reconstruction, since the Republicans who tried to help the South got chased out at the Compromise of 1877, the South has been firmly Democrat. But the Southerners don't trust the big New York City slicker Al Smith. So most Southern states end up supporting the Republican Herbert Hoover. They are known as Hoovercrats. These are Democrats in the South that support the Republican Herbert Hoover. And the support of the Hoovercrats will push Hoover over the top and allow him to win. Okay? Now, one of the big things that Hoover does, and we need to talk about this because this is incredibly important. Okay? The Hawley-Smoot Tariff. Okay? Now, if you will recall, a tariff is a tax on imports. Okay? And a tariff is usually set up to protect American manufacturers or farmers, whoever it is you're trying to protect, whatever you're taxing. Because if you tax imports, typically American goods are cheaper then, and people will buy the American goods, right? So tariffs are set up to protect your own people, okay? Now, Hawley-Smoot, as late as the mid to late 20s, farmers were already struggling, okay? So Hawley-Smoot began as a fairly reasonable protective tariff to help farmers. We were going to place a tariff on food coming into the country, okay, to help American farmers. It started in the House as a simple protective tariff. Okay? By the time it got through the Senate, it had acquired about 1,000 amendments. Senators started adding things on. Well, my state, we mine a lot of coal, so I'd like to put a coal tariff on here. Yeah, well, my state, we build a lot of engines, so I'd like to put a protective tariff on engines coming into the country. Yeah, well, my state, we build, whatever. So by the time it got done, there were over 1,000 amendments to the original simple farm tariff, okay? It turns out, by the time it is all said and done and it's passed, right, it turns out to be the highest tariff in peacetime history. No other tax on goods coming into the United States has ever been higher than Hawley-Smoot. The average tax on imports, went from 38% to close to 60%. There was a 60% tax on imports, meaning that any country that wanted to ship something to the United States to sell, they had to pay us 60% of the value of those goods just to get them into the United States. Now Hoover's thinking, this is great. This is free money for our country, right? All these other countries have to pay us this tariff to get their goods into the United States to sell. That's free money for us, except it doesn't work out that way. Hawley-Smoot almost single-handedly shuts down world trade. Other countries can't afford to sell things in the United States, so they stop shipping to us. And they stop buying from us. Because what are they going to do? They're going to turn around and slap a 60% tariff on everything the United States tries to sell in their countries. And if you are the largest exporting country in the world, which the United States is, we build and grow more than anybody else in the world. Okay? If you are the largest exporting country in the world, the very last thing you want is other countries slapping high tariffs on you. And that's exactly what they do. Countries stop trading with each other. U.S. companies that are building goods can't sell them anywhere. Hawley-Smoot almost single-handedly causes the Great Depression because it shuts down world trade. Right? And that brings us to the stock market crash. No decade is as cleanly and neatly defined as the 20s. It begins in 1920, right, with the end of World War I the year before, and it ends in 1929 with the stock market crash. It's a very tidy, neat little decade. Now, the crash comes in October 1929 on Black Tuesday. It actually begins the previous Thursday when stockbrokers start selling off stocks, and the price of stocks start dropping and dropping and dropping. And everybody starts to worry. And they say, well, and then they drop a little more on Friday. And everybody starts to really worry. And they say, it's okay. It's Friday. People have the weekend. Everything will calm down. And next Monday, we'll be back to normal and stocks will be going up again. Well, come the following Tuesday, October 29, 1929. Two 29s there. October 29, 1929. It's known as Black Tuesday. The bottom will fall out of the stock market. Okay? Now, we'll go into a lot more detail in class how this happens, how a stock market crashes, if you will. But basically, the value of stocks throughout the 20s kept going up and up and up and up and up. Okay, think of it as a balloon. You can only blow so much air into a balloon until eventually it pops, right? Well, wise investors, stockbrokers who do this for a living, saw this coming. They thought this can't keep going up. Eventually, they're going to go back down. And I better sell my stocks now while the prices are high. Problem was, most people playing stock market weren't using a stockbroker. They didn't know what they were doing. Okay? So on Black Tuesday, there is a sudden rash of selling, and everybody wants to sell their stocks. Well, when there's a flood of stocks on the market waiting to be bought, what happens to the price of them? What happens to the price of anything when you have a lot of it? It goes down. So the value of stocks started dropping very quickly. Right? More and more and more and more stocks were sold until eventually they were worthless. Okay? If you didn't sell your stock, you were stuck with it, and businesses closed. Right? So you're left holding stock that is worthless. You've lost your money. Now, if you'll think back to our previous slides here, how did you get the money to buy your stocks? You borrowed it from the bank, buying on margin. Right? Now you're holding worthless stock, but you still owe the bank money. So what happened was that banks started closing because several reasons, but one, nobody's paying back their loans. Banks started closing because they ran out of money. Nobody's paying back loans. Okay? And other reasons, which we'll get into later. But banks started shutting down. People started rushing to the bank. You see this picture at the bottom of the page here, right? Thousands of people would run to the bank and rush the bank to get their money out because they'd heard their neighbor lost all their money when the bank closed. Right? So banks would shut down, and with it, people lost their life savings. Right? Because the banks ran out of money. They didn't have money to give back to people. By the end of 1929, stockholders had lost $40 billion in stock value. $40 billion in stock value by the end of 1929. That's just in 2 months. Right? Over 5,000 banks closed in the first 3 years of the Depression. People lost their life savings when the banks closed. They had nothing. The stock market crash is not just about the stock market. It's about Hawley-Smoot. It's about unemployment. It's about banks closing and people losing everything. The stock market crash is simply one event in a much larger picture. Now, when the stocks collapse, businesses close. And when businesses close, people lose their jobs. By the end of 1930, more than 4 million workers were unemployed. 4 million workers had lost their job by 1930. By 1932, 12 million were unemployed. That's over 25% of the workforce. 12 million people unemployed. When you don't have a job and you have no life savings, you stand in line for food. The government organized bread lines and soup kitchens to feed once proud men who held good jobs, who all they want is to work a job again. Right? Now this sets the stage for our next unit when we get back on the Great Depression. Right? And this is just kind of, again, one cause of it. When we get back from break, we'll go into a long, detailed explanation of exactly how the stock market builds up and then how it collapses and what that means on a large scale for a worldwide depression. Okay? All right, that finishes our 1920s unit here. Remember I said at the beginning, this is the decade of contradictions. It's about rich versus poor. It's about the rich becoming poor after they got rich. It's about old ways of doing things versus new ways. It's about religion versus science. It's about modern technology. It's Charles Lindbergh conquering the Atlantic Ocean. This is a decade of change. Really big changes. Some of them are embraced by people and go over real well. Some of them are fought by society. But nonetheless, society will continue on, as will the United States. We'll see you after break.